City leaders in Augusta are having a tough time picking a new city administrator. The job's been in the hands of an interim administrator since Odie Donald left 2 years ago. So how big of a deal is that? Well, Janice Allen Jackson used to hold that same position, and this morning she is our studio guest this morning, one-on-one with Richard Rogers.
And Janice, it's great to have you here in studio with us this morning. I don't think a lot of people really understand your background, but let me just mention a couple of things. You majored in public policy at William and Mary. You got your master's at Duke. Safe to say you're an expert on this whole idea of being a city administrator. Wouldn't you say that's fair?
Yes, city administrator as well as local government in general. Having spent a few decades now in and around local government, obviously I worked in local government first and now I do local government consulting. I'm forever exposed to new ideas, new structures of government, the way different cities have tackled problems. So after all of this time, I do proudly consider myself a local government expert.
If this was a courtroom, I would have an expert witness in the chair right now.
That's
so
right.
Thank you for your insight. Does it concern you sitting here that after all these years, a couple of years now, we don't have a city administrator in place?
That is a bit of a concern. Ms. Dowse has been interim manager now, interim administrator for almost 2 years. And that's an awful long time to have an organization in limbo. I was talking to some folks a couple of days ago, and you have to realize it's not just the organization, which is bad enough, but in her former role as Director of Central Services, of course, there's an interim leader there as well. So, and that organization handles all facilities for the city. So it is very concerning as a taxpayer and as somebody who understands how organizations work. When you don't have consistent, stable, permanent leadership, that leaves a lot of people sort of off to their own devices. A lot of people just really questioning, hey, where do we go from here? How far do I take this idea? Because who knows, the next administrator may come in place and want to discard everything that we put in place here. Sure. So it really leaves the organization in limbo, which is just not good for the development and functioning of an organization, particularly one with 3,000 employees and $1 billion budget.
Absolutely. And you know the job well because you did the job. Just for perspective, who came before you? Who came after you? Give us a sense of that timing.
The administrator before me was Fred Russell.
Okay.
Fred started, I think, as deputy administrator and then moved up to administrator, and he left in December of 2013, I believe. And I came in November of 14, which was enough of a gap there. And then after I left, one of my deputies was appointed as interim administrator. I think he may have served for about a year or so. That was Jarvis Sims. And then after that, Odie Donald came in for about 15 or 16 months.
Right.
So now Ms. Dowse has actually been interim administrator longer than Odie Donald.
Longer than he served as administrator.
Yes.
And here's the unfortunate thing, I think you'll agree with this, you really can't separate politics from the position because you've got to be working with these people or else they will vote you out.
Yes.
Out of a job.
Yes. That is one of the pitfalls. That's why we consider administrator or manager jobs almost like football coaches. At the drop of a dime, you can be out of a job. And that's one of the reasons that we have contracts and things like that. Sometimes people go, well, why do they need a contract? And why do they need these perks? That's because there's so much risk with a job like that. I mean, at any moment, literally in my case, and of course it's well documented at this point, but I went to work that morning with a job and I left without one.
You absolutely did not know that would be your last day?
Yeah, we didn't know at all. That day, the termination of the general counsel was on the agenda, but there was no mention of the administrator at all. So that's how risky it is to be in a position like that.
How do you navigate that kind of muddy water?
That's why we ask for contracts with protections, number one. Okay. That's why we ask for that. You kind of know it comes with the territory, and of course you do things over the time that you're in position to build relationships with the council or the commission that you're working with.
They've got to trust you because they have that vote.
But it requires a lot of trust, requires a lot of communication. You'll see sometimes somebody will come in. Now, the average tenure is probably about what I served here, I was here for 4.5, 5 years, and that's probably about average. And sometimes if you see people now, even more in the profession, and those of us in the profession discuss it, sometimes I've seen people in and out in 18 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months.
There's no continuity there.
Yeah, and I don't think elected officials many times realize how disruptive that is to an organization when that happens.
So fast forward, the mayor hands over a list of candidates to commissioners. First thing you know, there's a big fight. How do things get sideways so quickly?
You know, that's interesting in this process, and I have a little bit of inside knowledge, not just from the standpoint that I'm a taxpayer who's paying attention, also as a former administrator, also as somebody who does consulting with the search firm that the city actually hired in this instance. And no, I did not work on this at all. I was not, but I know what the process is. That process is designed to drive you to a result. And we have worked with some cities that had a history of being very difficult to work with, and were able to come out with a result. So, number one, what has happened here in Augusta is unusual, but it appears as if they're not following, the commission is not acting cohesively to follow the recommendations that came out of that search process.
The mayor's supposed to hand over names. He handed over names.
He handed over names.
And things quickly went south.
And things quickly went south. One of the reasons, as you all have documented, is that the interim administrator was not even one of the ones on that list. So that was the first thing that sent it south. And now, as they seem to be discussing, they just don't seem to be following where the process leads. So
and here we are, another political standoff in Augusta,
and here
Georgia.
we are for the most significant position in the organization, significant staff position in the organization.
The next administrator, whoever he or she might be, do they start at a disadvantage because of this infighting as we begin the process?
For sure. One of our cardinal rules in the position, and you see people deviate from it, but one of the things that we always think about, if you go in on a split vote, you make one person angry, you're out the door.
You need a unanimous vote.
So people are always wary about going in when there's that type of split on the board.
And I thought being a news anchor was tough.
Yeah, and you're right. You thought that was it is very tough. You're working for elected officials, and many times they feel like they have to offer a knee-jerk reaction to whatever the public is thinking, and that makes the job very precarious.
Let's talk about gridlock, because this is really all about gridlock. Are you in favor of giving the mayor a vote and busting the gridlock up a little bit?
You know what? I'm not convinced that that addresses the real problem. I'll be honest, I think this is a situation where the body has bigger problems. You will see that the faces have changed, but the division always remains, and I think that's what our community at large has to grapple with, is how do we get rid of the division that we see so much of.
That's a great point, but should commissioners be able to control the agenda by walking out of a meeting and skipping a vote like that?
You know what? It's interesting you bring that up, because I don't know what, 5-10 years ago, somebody did a story on the history of consolidation, and one of the elected officials, can't remember who it was, but one of the state legislators who was in place at that time said, you know, that's the one thing we didn't predict. We didn't have any idea that that is how the elected officials would respond to keep the mayor from breaking those ties. So that was just one of those unintended consequences that came back from the way that they set up the charter.
So do you feel strongly about the mayor not having a vote, or you just think it's not that critical of an issue right now?
I just think it's not, it avoids dealing with the real issue. And the real issue is that for whatever reason, our elected officials have not been able to work together to build trust, to get along harmoniously. I mean, for example, myself and some of my neighbors started a LLC to do some improvement work in our neighborhood. And we decided from day one that every vote would be unanimous.
Right.
There are 4 of us.
We need to agree.
You know, if all 4 of us can't agree on a course of action, we're not going to pursue it. So it'd be very interesting to have that play out in a local government context.
I'm not sure we get anything done.
Not sure anybody has ever tried it, but that's just an example of the type of harmony that you almost need to have a very effective board.
I want to bring people up to speed with you. You're wearing a logo here. It says Local Matters
That's
Podcast.
right.
Along with a consultant, you have a podcast. Tell me about that.
Yes, I do. It's called the Local Matters Podcast of Georgia. It is, I've been around for 4 years, believe it or not, in the form of a radio show.
That's a lot of work.
WKZK, it's a lot of work, getting out a new podcast every week. I do 1 episode a week, and sometimes I'll do a live in addition to that.
Sure.
But we, on WKZK, Wednesday afternoons at 1:30 on the radio version, because some people still like radio, you know. The podcast version is on Spotify, Apple, and SoundCloud.
Everywhere people are.
And everywhere people are as well. We have a YouTube channel. It's the Local Matters Podcast of Georgia. And I focus on state and local government issues. The idea is to help people understand the issues, because many times they don't understand how government works. They just don't get it. And this is to show, hey, who does what? You know, because out here, you know, we're going to blame the city for something that the school board is doing. Well, no, that's the school board. That's
their
not
job.
the city. But a lot of times we don't even know, and we go to the polls and vote. And even those of us who vote regularly, sometimes we aren't researching the candidates. And I feel like sometimes we are hiring somebody for a job and don't know what the job description is.
And before I let you go, I know you think a lot about elections. Is this a busy year coming up as we go into an election year? What would you like people to know about the importance of local elections?
The services that you depend upon the most, for the most part, are handled at the local level. If you're concerned about public safety, well, the sheriff's office does that. You're concerned about the law enforcement system, the DA, district attorney, the judges. We vote for all those people, so we have some control over our quality of life. Everything from pothole patching to recreation and park services, those are things that are controlled at the local level. And recently I had Liz Owens on from WRDW, give her a plug, because it's a great episode and it's on the YouTube channel.
Talking about investigative work?
Yeah, and Liz, as part of that conversation, she said, you know, I never paid much attention to what the school system does. And I was like, that was really dumb on my part, because we got to vote for those people who run for school board. As soon as you become a parent, you start thinking about that.
Absolutely.
So we have all of those candidates on. From the week of qualifying on through May 21st, we'll have candidates for the various contested offices on here locally. Also looking at some state issues as well, state elections as well, if those are contested. So we encourage everybody to please follow us, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube.
The podcast is called Local Matters. We'll all be watching the story with the city administrator to see where things go from here. Janice Allen Jackson, thanks so much for stopping by, and thanks for your insight in this really important topic.
All right. Thank you for having me.